All right, good morning folks. Happy New Year. I just wanted to do a couple of videos to help with just remembering what we were doing in class before our break. So we're going to start by remembering that there's a quiz on Tuesday, the 9th, is it? Or 7th? The 7th. The next time we have class, you'll have a quiz. So the sheet that I gave you, the first worksheet that we went through, where you fill in this chart is part of the quiz. And then there will be 5 problems where you have to name the formula if I give you the compound name, and then 5 where you have to take the compound name, the formula, and write the name. So you have lots of practice problems on that type of situation you can review, and we're going to do a few of each of those right now. So we went over the first few of each chart on this page in class. So we're going to go over the next few where, pick up where we left off in class. So on the top chart on this page, we're going to start on problem number 6, which is lithium hydrogen sulfite. So when you're given the name of a chemical and you have to write its chemical formula, you need to figure out first, is this ionic or is it covalent? So if it's covalent, it'll be made up of all nonmetals. But lithium is a metal. It's here on the periodic table, it's a metal. So we know that this is going to be ionic. If it's ionic, you know it's made up of 2 ions. You'll have a cation, which is positively charged, and an anion, which is negatively charged. So you need to look at the name and figure out what the cation is. The metal will be the cation, so lithium. And since it's in this first row of the periodic table, it'll have a 1 plus charge. First row has a 1 plus charge. So lithium will be a 1 plus cation. So you need to know your chemical symbols for each element. This is why we went to all the trouble of memorizing them, because now you'll really have to know them. And then hydrogen sulfite. So that's not one of the ones that you have to have memorized for the quiz, but it's on your good to know list that just gives you more opportunity to practice. So hydrogen sulfite is HSO3, and it's a 1 negative anion charge. It has 1 too many electrons, so 1 negative. So when you put them together to write the chemical formula, you just cross their charges. So lithium, there'll be 1 of those since the hydrogen sulfite has a negative 1 charge, and then there'll be 1 hydrogen sulfite because the lithium has a 1 charge also. So when you write its formula, let me find my black marker. Here we go. It'll be that's not good. Here we go. LiHSO3. So lithium, hydrogen sulfite, very easy. They're both 1 charge, so 1 of each. Carbon tetrachloride. Now I threw in a few tricks on these charts just to keep you thinking. So remember, the first thing you do, is this thing ionic or covalent? Well, I dropped my periodic table. But carbon is a nonmetal. And tetrachloride, of course, when you see that prefix, maybe you're dealing with a covalent here, definitely. And then chloride, that would be a chlorine. It's also a nonmetal. So carbon and chlorine, both nonmetals. So this is a covalent. So there'll be no cation, no anion, because it's not ionic. It can't have ions. So carbon tetrachloride. Well, we know tetra means 4. So carbon tetrachloride, 1 carbon. Since it doesn't have a prefix, it just is 1. And then tetrachloride, chlorine is Cl. Tetra means 4, so carbon tetrachloride, CCl4. It's a good solvent. Water is the normal solvent we use, but carbon tetrachloride is nonpolar, so it's different than water, and we're going to talk about that on Tuesday, why you would choose this nonpolar solvent instead of water in certain situations. But we'll get to that later. Hopefully you've read the end of chapter 9 and maybe you already know. So look at number 8. Nickel 3 carbonate. Well, if you look at your periodic table to decide is this ionic or covalent, you see nickel. Well, nickel is one of the transition metals. So it is a metal, so you have an ionic, but when you have a transition metal, you've got to think about your Roman numeral. Nickel 3 carbonate means that nickel, the metal, will be the cation, and since the Roman numeral is 3, it's going to have a 3 plus charge. So nickel 3 is nickel, the 3 plus charge, meaning it has 3 fewer electrons than the elemental form. Carbonate, that's one that you should have memorized. Make sure you really memorize this chart. You'll use it all year. You'll come across this on tests every single module for the rest of the year. If you don't have these memorized for the rest of the year, it's really going to be hard. So carbonate, CO3 anion with a 2 minus charge. Then when you write the formula, you just switch their charges. So nickel, I write Ni, and then I look at its fringe charge, 2 minus, so that means I'm going to have 2 nickels. And then I write my CO3, and I can see that I'm going to need 3 of those, so I'll have to use parentheses. I write a 3. Oh, my 3. There we go. So nickel 3 carbonate, Ni2, and then CO3, 3. There'll be a question on your test about how many of each atom is in a specific ionic compound. Nickel 3 carbonate would be a good example of one that you want to practice with that. In this case, you would have 2 nickel atoms, you would have 3 carbon atoms, and you would have 9 oxygen atoms. So 2 nickel, 3 carbon, 9 oxygen. It's important to keep count like that. And when you use things like this to balance an equation, though, you really want to think of that carbonate as a unit, like it's almost one thing. So I would balance thinking I've got 2 nickels and I've got 3 carbonates. I would not balance an equation thinking I've got 2 nickels, 3 carbons, and 9 oxygens. I would keep that carbonate ion as like a lump and balance it together, because remember, the whole point of studying these polyatomic ions is that a polyatomic ion is, yes, an ion. It has either more or fewer electrons than you would expect, so it has a net charge on the whole ion, but within the ion, the CO3 part is covalently bonded together. So even though it's an ion, it itself is covalently bonded. So, because you can see CO3 all nonmetals. So that little piece is covalent, even though the entire thing has a charge, so it's ionic. So that's an important part of the test too. So we'll move on. Chromium 2 chlorate. So chromium 2 obviously is a metal, transition metal, since you see its Roman numeral. Right there it is. So chromium 2 plus charge because of the Roman numeral. Chlorate, did you have to memorize that one? Yes.